Hello, and welcome to another episode of Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast for the Irish Daily Star and Irish Mirror. I'm Michael O'Toole, and this is Paul Healy.
Hello, Michael.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? How was your break?
Yes, I was off in France for 3 weeks where I had the daily battle of me speaking French, the waiters and waitresses, and them answering me in English. But I refused to give in, and I did win a few times. So it was good. I must say, I was very, very refreshed. I was just over 10 days there. I was off for 3 weeks all in. So in the time I was off, we did the Q&A. And I have to say, as personally, I listened to them. I thought they were really, really interesting myself. You know, when you record something and a few weeks later it comes out and you've half forgotten about them. I thought it was really, really good. I thought it was a really good format. And I know we got good feedback from our listeners about it. So we'll do them every now and again. I think it is a good way of interacting with our listeners.
Yeah, it is. Seems to have done really, really well, and we appreciate the questions. And we'll take questions anytime. You can DM us on social media, Twitter, anytime. And we will probably, as you say, do another one soon.
Yeah. So as you said, I was off for 3 weeks. There was a lot happening, and we're going to talk about some of those issues when I was away. I want to talk firstly about a really good story you had in today's Mirror and Star. It's in relation to the murder of a lady called Josephine Ray. This happened in Nina, County Tipperary, just as I was heading off. I think it was my first day of the holidays. Fill us in on what happened to this lady and your story from today.
Yeah, well, just to say, if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, you can see just probably at the start of this podcast, just a short video clip of this interview that I conducted yesterday. Sort of an unexpected interview as such, but we went down to try and speak to these people, but didn't expect it to turn into a full-on interview. They are Mary Ray and Hassan Ali Gori. Mary Ray is the daughter of Josephine Ray, a daughter of Josephine Ray. And both of these individuals basically were living with Josephine in her home in St. Joseph's Park in Nina when they discovered her body in her bedroom on the morning of Sunday, the 4th of August. Subsequent to a post-mortem examination, Gardaí upgraded the investigation of Josephine's death into a full-on murder investigation. And since then, between now and the 4th of August, there were 2 arrests. So 2 individuals were arrested, a woman and a man in their 50s. And that is what the general public knew, and that's what was press released. But what we're revealing in today's Mirror and Star is that those arrested individuals were Mary Ray and this man by the name of Hassan Ali Gori. So we wanted to speak to them because they were arrested. They were released without charge. And my information was that they were basically homeless and were wandering the streets. And we were interested to hear, I suppose, what their explanation of the events were and whether they would speak about being arrested.
Now, my information from the time is that there would be an indication that Mrs. Ray, I think she was 89, as you say, she was 89, suffered. Yeah. She suffered strangulation or asphyxiation.
Yeah, there is an indication of strangulation, but also a suspicion also of asphyxiation. And I understand that I think a pillow was removed from the crime scene. And, also it was described to me by a family member, her grandson, Daniel, told me about when he saw his grandmother's body and that she had facial injuries as well, as though she had possibly been assaulted in some way, and he believed that she'd fought back against her attacker.
Now, as you say, Paul, 2 people were arrested, and the way it works is, you're either charged or released with a file to DPP, and in this case, I understand it is released and there's a file being prepared for the DPP. That's standard, but it's very, very rare for people who have been arrested and questioned and released without charge to be identified. What was your thinking in relation to this case story?
Well, I think it's, for better or worse, it is a fascinating story, and it's one now that has been in the headlines for the past couple of weeks. And because there is no obvious immediate motive behind this there's many facets to it, I thought it would be interesting to hear if they wanted to speak the side of the story of 2 people who had been arrested and as far as I understood it, protesting their innocence. They are also the only, there are two of three people that were living in the house with Josephine Ray. So I had, as I mentioned, interviewed Josephine's grandson. He lives up the road and he had a close relationship with her. And indeed, he was called down to the house the morning of Sunday and saw her body, but he wasn't one of the individuals living in the house. So I felt it would be interesting to hear the story of those who actually lived with Josephine Ray and what they had to say about the events that night.
And the really important factor is you really effectively you needed that couple's consent before you could identify them and name them and run their pictures.
Yeah, well, just to explain to people from a legal perspective, we are always kind of acting with our hands semi-tied. We have to act within the law. If a person is willingly speaking to us, we're able to say a lot more. In our society, and this is correct, you have the presumption of innocence. Even when you end up on trial, you have that presumption of innocence. And I suppose there is a level of protection the law gives you when you're arrested and you're not charged with any offense, that you're typically not identified. But if you come out and you speak about it, so there have been, I won't give examples just to be, I don't want to compare this, but there have been examples in the past of people who have spoken willingly on the record about being arrested on suspicion of murder or another charge. And because of that, then we can identify them. So in this case, when we did find these two individuals, they spoke to me willingly and ultimately were allowed themselves to be photographed and spoke openly about being arrested on suspicion of Josephine's murder.
Okay, so let's get down to it. What did they say?
Well, I suppose unsurprisingly, they are protesting their innocence and they're saying they are totally innocent. We're not murderers. They talked about being homeless, that they're now out on the street because obviously the house that they were residing in was declared a crime scene. And they also said that it's too painful for them to go back anyway. But Hassan and Mary spoke about, getting verbal abuse on the streets and dirty looks. And indeed, actually, something I have not mentioned in the interview, while I was even speaking to them on the street, someone in a car actually did pull over and start shouting abuse at Hassan in particular. So I saw that firsthand, that just from walking down the street, they were being eyeballed and getting verbal abuse. They'd come in to Nina on a bus from, I understand they're residing outside of Nina at the moment, and they're kind of pretty much trying to stay out of the area for their own safety. I won't read out the whole interview. You can read it in the Mirror and the Star, but they said, we're both innocent. Mary said, I told the Gardaí, they accused me, and I said I didn't do it. Why would I do that to my own mother? I couldn't do it. I couldn't do a thing like that. I loved her. They spoke about being arrested. Mary said it was a surprise. She was shocked. She spoke about finding her mother that morning. So she said that she'd made her a cup of tea and biscuits the night before and told her good night. And then that morning, she thought it was unusual that she wasn't up already. She went into the room and she said that she thought she was still sleeping. She left her for a while. She went back in and she said that the blanket was over her mouth. And she said, I thought she was sleeping. She said, Josie, do you want a cup of tea? And she said Josie wasn't answering her. And then she realized that she was dead and an ambulance was called. She didn't realize at that stage, she said, that she had been murdered or that anything nefarious had happened to her. As I said, she was an 89-year-old woman, and Mary is saying that she didn't suspect anything nefarious at that point in time. Hassan also spoke in the interview about the front door of the house being opened, and they raised suspicions about that. But they said that they don't know what happened to Josephine, and they didn't point the finger at anyone else. They have no theory as to what happened to her. Hassan insisted that he went to bed on the Saturday night and that he never entered Josephine's room. And they also openly spoke about, which is well reported now, the fact that Gardaí were actually called to that address the night before Josephine was found dead. So the Saturday night, they were called to a disturbance. And both Mary and Hassan openly acknowledged that they were having, as they said, a conversation, a chat that had upset Josephine. And they said they went outside, and Mary said that issue, whatever it was resolved. And that was it. Hassan also alluded to, he said there were many things going on over the past while. We have well reported that there were many different instances that were raised to the Gardaí and to the council of disturbances at that address over the past year. So they acknowledge that as well. But they're very much protesting their innocence in a nutshell and saying, and the exact quote they say, "We are not murderers."
And I thought that was interesting what you said about them being abused. As you said, we don't normally name people who are arrested and released without charge. But the dogs in the street know. The people in their communities, wherever. I'm not just talking about this case, I'm talking about wherever. People in the areas will always know. So just because they're not named in the media, it doesn't mean that people don't know who they are.
Well, yeah, and I think that's possibly another reason why there was a justification in trying to speak to them. Because it is quite well known now at this stage who they are, and also, it's a bit ridiculous when I mean, for example, when I did the interview with Daniel, Josephine's grandson, we were quite legally limited as to even some of the things we could say. Because of the fact that we didn't want to identify other people that were in the house with Josephine. Well, now we can say that they were in the house with Josephine because they've spoken willingly. But Daniel did also speak about disturbances at the house over the past while and how he had contacted Gardaí, not 999, but how he had contacted the local Garda station over 40 times over the past year about what he said were disturbances at that house in St. Joseph's Park. So there were ongoing concerns. And Daniel is very much looking for justice for his grandmother, as are other members of the family. It's a really horrendous and horrible crime. I mean, she was an 89-year-old woman who was quite well loved and well known in the community. She was known for her glamour in particular, and was kind of the heart and soul of Nina. Like most people in the town would tell you that they would know Josephine. They knew her as Josie, or Joan as well, she was known as. And at 89 years of age was full of life, apparently a very vibrant woman. So it's a very, very sad end to her life.
And this is not the end. The investigation is ongoing. The guards are still investigating away. So we're not going to prejudge anything, but who knows what will happen in the future. The investigation is not dead. It's not a cold case. No, it's not. And, there's a file gone to the DPP, and that will decide whether anybody will be charged in this case. So we'll certainly keep an eye on it with interest. Just one last question in this. How did they, when you were talking to them, were they shook, or how did they look? I think initially shook because they were seeing someone approach them in the street. They didn't know what they were in for, but I was surprised. I still get surprised when people are that willing and open to speak to me. They very much wanted to tell their side of the story. And as I said, I asked them at the end, did they want themselves to be photographed? And they agreed to that. So, and we also did a video with them. So they were very much wanting to speak and tell their side of the story. And as you say, they are proclaiming their innocence. Thank you for speaking to me. You were both arrested in relation to the murder of Josephine Ray, and Josephine's obviously your mother.
He knows nothing about it.
You know nothing about it?
He knows nothing about it. All this accusation. All this false accusation.
False accusation. And you want the person who is responsible brought to justice? Can I ask you, just obviously, was it upsetting to be arrested?
Yes, it was upsetting. It was upsetting to be arrested up to 4 times. First one, interview. The second one is interview and also interrogating in the station for over how many days, and locked up. Continual interrogation of questions, allegations from one head which don't know anything about.
Okay. But you're telling me and everyone that you are both innocent.
We are all innocent.
Thank you.
So moving on, you met a very famous person in North Dublin when I was away.
Yeah, well, famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, I suppose. But, we mentioned in our Q&A pod, we were asked a question about what criminal we would want to interview. And I did mention the monk for obvious reasons, the fascinating character. And yes, while you were away, we had an opportunity to finally try, anyway, to speak to Gerry The Monk Hutch. He has not spoken since he was acquitted of the murder of David Byrne at the Regency Hotel last year. And as I said, he has a fascinating story. So I wanted to get an opportunity to doorstep him when we had that opportunity out in the North Dublin area about 2 weeks ago now. And yeah, I was, I suppose, in one sense, pleasantly surprised that he took the time to speak to me and was very gentlemanly and respectful of my position and understanding of my job. And whilst he didn't say really anything, it wasn't hostile, and it wasn't in any way disrespectful. So, he's a fascinating character. He was acquitted of the murder of David Byrne, and my first and really only question to him, when I tried to just keep it light, was, how does it feel to be a free man? I thought he might answer that question, but he's a very intelligent person and lives in a different world to you and I. There are lots of different factors, I suppose, he has to take into account. He knows that, and as he said to me, no matter what he says, it will more than likely be something he has to read about. So he's very cautious of what he says. So he said no comment. But he did multiple times invite me for a pint. And I suppose suggested his broad point was, if I met you in a pub, sure, I'd have a pint with you and I'd have a chat with you, but I can't talk to you as a journalist the same way as I suppose he probably wouldn't willingly, unless he was forced to, speak to a member of the police. It's just, that's the code, and I think that's a code he lives by, and I probably can understand it and probably expected it to some degree. I have to do my job, and he understood that I had to do that. But he said, if I was talking to you in a bar, if we went for a pint, if I just met you as a person in the street, would I have a chat with you? Sure. But does he want what he has to say to be published? No, he doesn't.
And the courteous way that he spoke to you is no surprise to me anyway. I had a couple of interactions with him now. Really, it was in the mid-noughties and up, probably just before the feud started, so maybe 2014. And he would ring him the odd time. I know his number, one of his numbers off by heart. It's just amazing. But anyway, and I'd always ring him and he'd always say the same thing: I have nothing to say to you. And that was it. But he was very polite and kind. He just wasn't interested. And but that is like, do you know that some people don't react too well when you ring them or contact them? Do you remember that? I put it up on Twitter every couple of years. I must do it again. Once I asked a criminal who'd survived a shooting if he'd like to talk to me. And I texted him and I said, it was so old, there was no Twitter or anything. I texted him my Gmail address, and he went, ask me bollocks, right? I'll have to put that up again. But, the monk, he's always very courteous, very professional, never loses the head with you. And it was always, I have nothing to say to you. All right, no problem, Mr. Hutch, I tried.
No, well, I mean, if you see from the photographs that were taken, he was coming out of a shop. He was getting on his bike. He kind of relaxed himself and sat up on the bike and talked to me at length. He wasn't in any rush to get out of there and was very relaxed. Is he aware of his surroundings? Yes. I mean, I definitely noticed that he was looking all around him, but at the same time, he did it in a way that it wasn't shifty, and it wasn't intimidating and it wasn't scary to speak to him. To some extent, I suppose, and I get the sense that he is appreciative of the coverage of his trial in particular. And I understand that he feels grateful that there was a large media presence that highlighted the trial, because I think anyone who looked at it would see that there was no evidence to convict him of being the shooter in the Regency Hotel, which is what the evidence in the trial was. So I certainly think he believes that the widespread coverage of that meant that there would be no kangaroo court situation. There would be no he wouldn't just be convicted on nothing, because it was there for everybody to see that there was no evidence to convict him of that charge. But I got the sense, and I did ask him, will you ever speak? Will you ever tell your story? And he pretty much indicated that he would probably never do so. I think he's probably just happy, and wouldn't you could nearly understand it, to be a free man, to just be able to go on and live his life. You can kind of respect that to some degree. But I think he certainly knows he's no fool. He knows he has an extraordinary story.
And it's just interesting, just how, I know you said he was observing his surroundings. A lot of people do that. I'd say you and I do that. We are aware. We have a heightened sense of awareness. I'm sure he does. But would you think what we've spoken about a few times about the reduction of the feud, it's moribund, or did you believe that he was more relaxed now than he would have been at the height of the feud? In other words, does he feel as if in your view, does he feel as if does it come across as if he feels as if he's a man who's in danger?
No, I didn't get that sense at all. He was incredibly relaxed. Look, I mean, he kept the bike helmet on. I suppose he didn't stay around too long, but at the same time, he did, as I said, he sat up on the bike and he talked to me in quite a relaxed manner. So, and he is out and about in Dublin. I know it's been reported that, he spends most of his time in Lanzarote. He spends an awful lot of time in Lanzarote, but he also spends an awful lot of time at home. He's not hiding away or shying away. And as you've seen, there's been pictures of him openly enjoying a good time with lots of people at the celebrations for Kelly Harrington over the past week and a half. He's been well photographed out and about at that. So he's incredibly relaxed, and clearly that's indicative of the feud being in a very different place. And
he also, as well as the Canary Islands, he also spends time in mainland Spain. We know that he has plenty of proper interests in Fuengirola, where he was arrested in couple of years ago anyway for the extradition. So yeah, he's moving around a lot. Was it 2021? Jesus, time flies. So he is moving around a lot, and he's enjoying his life, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, he certainly is. And I think he'll continue to do so. I'd be surprised if he ever did an interview. If he happens to listen to this, although I highly doubt it, Jared, we'd still be happy to talk to you. And I know that there's a certain skepticism of newspapers. You can come on a podcast like this and have people listen to you if you want. But I'd say it's highly, highly unlikely that he will, or that he ever will listen to this. But I'm sure that we would be happy to speak to him.
God loves a trier. So he's enjoying his life. I think one person who is definitely not enjoying his life at the minute is a certain Graham Dwyer. And while I was away, there was big news in relation to his bid for freedom.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose, again, this comes as no surprise to anybody who's been following this with interest. But yes, Graham Dwyer has lost his Supreme Court bid, his final bid for freedom. And, he was challenging very much the mobile phone data. And, the European law did, to some extent, favor him initially. But first, the Court of Appeal ruled against him here and found that that had very little bearing on his actual case, and that there was far more evidence, even outside of the evidence that he was challenging, to convict him of the murder of Elaine O'Hara. And the Supreme Court has upheld that. So all of Graham Dwyer's legal avenues in this country now are over. He could take it to the European courts, which I suspect he probably will. He certainly has the money for it. But yeah, all of his legal avenues here in Ireland are gone. But also, just his woes continue, I suppose, because there are two different stories I've got off the back of that over the past 2 weeks. One is in relation to, I suppose, maybe a more minor thing, the architect's register. So the I'm going to get this wrong now, but Graham Dwyer is registered as an architect still in Ireland, and you wouldn't believe the process that there is to get him removed from that, but only now, because he has finally lost his Supreme Court appeal, the process can begin to try and remove him from that. But the process is extraordinary. There's going to be effectively a court hearing in which Dwyer can actually call representatives to plead his case to stay on the Register of Architects, which I suppose he's going to probably do out of boredom, because that's all he can do when he's serving a life sentence. why exactly it's important for him to remain registered as an architect in this country, I don't know. And then the other, I suppose, aspect are the women visiting Graham Dwyer, which I think is probably the more fascinating story that you and I can both contribute to. This latest development is extraordinary, and I will credit to the Sunday Independent who first broke the story about this lady who was visiting Graham Dwyer recently. When you're visiting a prisoner, you can put yourself down. The prisoner puts you down as a family member, a friend, or a spouse or a partner. And in this case, Graham Dwyer had placed this lady down as a friend, and she referred to herself as a friend. And the Sunday Independent interviewed this lady and granted her anonymity, as she lives in the west of Ireland. And she said that she wanted to. She was on a fact-finding mission, she said, and that she wanted to speak to Graham Dwyer and that she considered him to be a friend. So that was what came out of that interview. But off the back of that interview, my information was that there was an investigation into this lady's visits. So I was told she had managed to visit Graham Dwyer at least twice, I think only twice, in the Midlands prison over the past couple of weeks. And there was this investigation launched, and off the back of that, it was determined that this lady can no longer be allowed to visit Graham Dwyer, that she didn't fit the criteria of a friend, as he had put it, and as she had described herself. And so she's now banned from visiting Graham Dwyer ever again. But I think what's fascinating is that she is the fourth, I think, lady visitor to Graham Dwyer, who also receives dozens of love letters from people who would, for some reason, like to, I suppose, share love with a convicted killer. And you've certainly had your share of stories about that over the years.
Triggering me, Healy. You're triggering me. I did the first story about a woman. Oh, fuck me. Right. Okay. Do I have to talk about this? Okay. Yes. There was I'm not going to name her. It's just you're bringing it all back anyway. So yeah, this woman, and I found her, and we interviewed her, and then she went all over the place on all the radio and everything, and it turned into be a fucking nightmare. So let her at it. But she was the first. She wasn't the last, and I would venture that this lady who has been banned from contacting Mr. Dwyer will not be the last either. There is some people. Not just women, some men as well. Some people have fascination with killers, and Dwyer is a very fascinating person to a lot of people. I was just going to ask you, he has been in custody for more than a decade now.
Which is hard to believe, isn't it?
Isn't it? And next year will be the 10th anniversary of his trial. So it was early 2015. I covered it. It was, wow, what a fascinating, ripping trial that was. It was really, really huge. First one, it was the first murder case live tweeted in Ireland. I was doing tweets every 30, like yourself, tweets every 30 seconds. And I remember we probably should have asked, it was Mr. Justice, Tony Hunt. We probably should have asked for permission to do it, but we just did it. But anyway, it all worked out in the end. But he next year will be the 10th anniversary of a trial, but he was in custody from late 2013. Now, we've spoken about this. At the minute, most lifers really do, I think it's 21, 22 years. So he's probably around halfway through the average of a lifer, but Graham Dwyer is no average lifer. How long do you think he'll be in custody for?
I'd say at least 30 years.
He will, he's 55, 54, and in his early 50s now. He'll be in his 70s before he gets out. He is such a danger. We know from his own words about his obsession with raping and killing women. So this man is the epitome of a danger to women. And I don't think that lust in him will disappear anytime soon. So prison, I always remember Mr. Justice Paul McDermott in the Anacrusial trial. I was there for the sentencing of the boys, and he said there has to be a punishment element to this as well as everything else in relation to prison. So Dwyer has to be punished, but there also is also rehabilitation and that sort of thing. So I think it'll be a very, very long time before he gets. And crucially, we know this. He denies murder. He denies he had anything to do with the murder of Ilian O'Hara, God love her. So that's one thing that's
a huge
important.
factor. Yeah.
Explain that about people getting out on
Well, you have to
license.
To get it to be considered for parole. A huge element of it is the rehabilitation element, which is you have to acknowledge the crime that you've committed and be remorseful for it, but also you have to engage with various different services within the prison that are really only available to you if you have that remorse, if you are accepting of your crime. So Joe O'Reilly is another example. Murdered his wife Rachel in 2004, coming up on 20 years of that. And he also hasn't accepted his crime and hasn't engaged with services. And so, similar to Graham Dwyer, will probably serve an extraordinary amount of time in prison because he hasn't engaged with those services and he hasn't, crucially, accepted his guilt.
So, just in relation to the murder of Detective Guardy Adrian Dono, Aaron Brady, he got 40 years, but he'll serve 30 years because he's entitled to remission. But that's a fixed sentence because there's a fixed sentence for capital murder of a Garda. Dwyer, I think he'll do 30 years.
Yeah.
Easily.
Bare minimum.
Yeah. So
he's lost all his avenues now. So I mean, I think he's just literally left to boredom now. He resides on a sex offenders wing as well in the Midlands prison and is apparently quite the loner. So he really only has these women who are, for whatever reason, fascinated in him to entertain him, and the possibility of this European court bid to keep him going, really.
And just to stress this, he planned most murders, I would contend, are not planned. Okay, they may be ordered, but there's a level of planning in relation to this murder of Elaine O'Hara. He groomed her for murder over a long period of time, and he probably he had been involved with her. Then they went their separate ways. Then he rekindled that, and for me, that showed how long he'd been planning this. In my mind, he rekindled that relationship to groom her for murder. And that is chilling that someone would spend such a long time planning a murder. There are very few murders that are planned to that degree in Ireland. So he's a special case and not special in a good way. So he's in the Midlands prison. Mm-hmm. Next door to the Midlands prison is Portlaoise prison. And you have a story about the issue of drugs in Portlaoise prison.
Well, yeah, this was one of those stories that, I was working on something completely different at the time. I was down the country and I got a phone call and it just completely stopped me in my tracks. And whatever I was doing no longer mattered because I knew that this was going to be a huge story. So I got a phone call quite early on that day to be told there's something going on in Portlaoise prison. Initially, my contact had actually, I'd be careful not to identify them, but they knew something was up, but they didn't quite know what it was. And then I subsequently got another phone call back not long after that. Several overdoses, mass overdose event in Portlaoise prison. And they told me that the local hospital, Midlands Regional, was out the door with it and wasn't able to cope with the number of prisoners that were being rushed via ambulance to hospital with these immediate overdoses. So I was told the numbers were increasing. It eventually went up to 12 prisoners who all had to be transferred to multiple hospitals, I think, as a result of overdosing. And it wasn't initially clear what kind of drug they consumed. A powder-like substance had been seized and was given to Gardaí, the HSC, for examination. So they knew they had overdosed on some powder-like substance and they needed immediate hospitalization. We're very, very fortunate now, after all of this crisis, that no one died. It's extraordinary that nobody died because a number of these patients were very serious and 3 of them were critical. And there were serious fears that those patients would die. And one of them was actually a notorious gangland killer by the name of Peter Kenny. And Peter Kenny was actually critical, fighting for his life in ICU. Among a number of other people. So it all happened in one area of the prison on the C wing. which houses some gangland killers and notorious figures. But of course, we should also point out that anyone really who's in Portlaoise is somewhat notorious. It is the country's maximum security prison. Which again makes this whole story more extraordinary because this stuff got in somehow and it immediately, like an infection, just took hold on dozens of prisoners and they became seriously ill. As far as I know, and maybe you're around longer than me, I have never come across something like this where that many prisoners overdosed all at one go. It was a huge event, and the response to it was incredible.
No, not in my memory has there been anything like this. I was interested in what the POA, the Prison Officers Association, had to say about this event. And from memory, they basically said that there's a real bad problem with drugs getting into all Irish prisons.
Yeah, I mean, they said that they had been banging this drum for a long time, and in a sense that this was a crisis that was coming, and it was, that is the ease at which drugs are getting into the prison system. Now, in this case, I understand there is a comprehensive Garda and prison investigation, and the suspicion immediately fell upon one of the prisoners on that landing who had been out on a transfer only a couple of days prior on escort. So they had been out on a form of temporary release, and there was a fear that that prisoner in some way managed to smuggle this substance back into the prison. And whenever they took it, I don't think these prisoners were aware of what they were taking. Initially, the suspicion was that they had taken a substance called spice, which is like a cannabis type drug. But then there was talk of another drug, which is known kind of as Nike, as in like the brand Nike. But that's kind of an opiate type drug. But the HSE have since come back now, and they have actually identified it as it's kind of a hypnotic sedative drug called, I'm going to get the name of this wrong. It's a synthetic benzoiodine known as clobrosolam, and it is the first time that it has ever been detected in this country. So I don't know whether they were using a drug and they thought it was something else. I don't think the prisoners who took it knew what they were taking. But it shows you the serious problem of drugs and the type of substances that are now getting in. This comes off the back of a very serious warning about another substance called nitazene, which has caused people to die. There were 2 fatal overdoses this year alone. There was an inspector of prisons report into the death of a man in custody in Cork from that substance. And then very recently, a young man who was only in on a short prison sentence also died overdosing from this nitazene substance. So they're taking these tablets, these substances, hypnotic substances, I suppose, to escape from the reality of prison. But unfortunately, I'd say the vast majority of them don't even it's probably, here, take this, it'll make you feel better. They probably don't even realize what it is that they're taking.
And that's the point. We've spoken about this a couple of times, Paul, about how, I have no problems with prisoners having TVs and PlayStations because your liberty's taken away from you and it's shit. And, from my perspective, the drugs they take are to get them through the day or to take their minds off it or just escapism. Prison's hard, no matter what people think. Prison is hard, and the lack of liberty is terrible because you can't do what you want. And I don't think people really understand that, and they think, prison's cushy. It's not. It's far from it.
I think the problem is now the lengths of desperation that there is to get that stuff in, and the results of that are often unseen. But there's been a lot of tragic stories of late, as I said, those 2 individuals who overdosed from the nitazene substance, but there was also reports of a young man who died in 2021 in Cloverhill Prison. He was on remand. His name was Stephen Watson. And he was bullied effectively by 2 other high-profile prisoners to ingest and conceal drugs. And he was very much, the investigation into his death found that he was pressured to do that, although he was in prison, he was a nobody kind of young man who got caught up in and unfortunately was pressured into doing this. He died. Now there has yet to be a coroner's report into his death, as in an inquest, but there will be. But the findings of the Inspector of Prisons report into his death indicates that that these events beforehand, in some sense, led to his death. So whatever he ingested contributed to his sudden death in prison, and he was only, I think, 21 years of age, very young. So that's the consequences of smuggling drugs into prison. It causes people to die. That's the barefaced reality of it, unfortunately.
Right. Okay. Shall we talk about the position of Garda Deputy Commissioner?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a fascinating time at the top tier of An Garda Síochána, isn't it?
It's fascinating, but it's also extremely important, and it may be sort of inside baseball or City Hall sort of stuff, but I'm going to try and explain, in my opinion, why this is quite an important position. So essentially what has happened is the government has advertised for the position of Deputy Garda Commissioner, operational Deputy Garda Commissioner, basically, who runs the show, really, with the commissioner above him or her. So there's a vacancy. We know that there's one deputy, who's Shauna Coxon, who's doing sort of both. She's from Canada. And obviously Garda Commissioner Drew Harris has a background of service in the RUC and then PSNI. So this vacancy, the third leg of that trinity, shall we say, is really, really important. Now, there is an issue with the thorny issue of pensions. Effectively, there are 8 Garda Assistant Commissioners who can go for this job. Okay, the next level up is Assistant Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner, and then Commissioner. Okay, so in practice, it's really Assistant Commissioners who can go for it. Now, 6 of those 8 current 8 Assistant Commissioners, all their services have been in Garda Síochána. Now, there were pension changes brought in around 2011, I think, during austerity, that if your pension pot is over a certain amount, you get taxed to fuck. Okay, so essentially, if these 6 Garda careerist commissioners, people who've been in the guards all the way up, go for this, there are 2 who joined from the PSNI, Paula Hillman and Bran Roberts. They're both ACs. They will not be penalised the way that the 6 Garda careerist people will. So there was a good piece in the Examiner last week that those 6 Garda all the way up assistant commissioners have written to the Justice Minister, Helen McEntee, asking for this competition to be postponed because they think they're being penalised. Wow. It is quite a thorny issue. And here's why I think it's a thorny issue. The real issue is, and now, when I say penalised, they would lose, I think it's up to £500,000 over a certain amount of time in tax over a 20-year period, over, right? That's an awful lot of money. So if your pension pot, I think it's over £1 million, could be more, then you're taxed. Okay. Most of us won't have that, but obviously, when you're a Garda commissioner and you're working your way up from guard, sergeant, inspector, superintendent, chief, AC, that's the rank structure, you get a certain pension pot, and it can be very valuable with other senior civil servants as well. So they want this postponed. There is currently a report on Jack Chambers, the finance minister's desk, about reforming this. My indication is it won't be in this year's budget or budget 2025. So it's going to go on. So it's a big issue. And I personally think if this isn't resolved, none of those 6 Garda assistant commissioners will go for this. Wow. Now, why is that important?
Well, also the top job is going to be free very soon, isn't it? I mean, the commissioner himself is not seeking for his term to be extended beyond 2025.
Yes, and this is why this is important. More often than not, with the exception of Drew Harris, actually, because he wasn't in the guards, the person who's deputy commissioner policing becomes commissioner. Okay, so Drew Harris goes, I think is July next year. So he's got about a year, maybe a wee bit less, to run as commissioner, and he's not interested in extending. He was extended once for 2 years. That's come up next year. So the person who gets this gig is more than likely going to be the next commissioner.
To be the next commissioner, yeah.
Now, this race is an issue. At the minute, now, I'm a northerner, so I can say this, okay? At the minute, we have a northerner who's in the PSNI and RUC as commissioner. We have Shauna Coxon, who is in the Canadian Police as deputy commissioner. Is it the right message if the person who gets the second deputy and the third part of that trinity is not a careerist and I mean careerist in the sense of having a career all the way in Garda Síochána, does that send the right message that all three of those people will be from outside on Garda Síochána?
I think certainly from our understanding of vast majority of members of Garda Síochána, there would be outrage over that, if not protest. I think certainly, whilst I'm sure that people have no issue with people from the north coming into the job, I think for it to happen again for certain members of Garda Síochána who've worked their whole life in the force to be maybe perhaps overlooked, I think there would be. I just don't think it would stand. I think there would be outrage over it.
And as a Republican and as a Nordy myself, and I'm coming down, myself and Stephen Breen, another Nordy who works my frenemy in the Sun, we have dramatically improved the quality of crime journalism in the Republic. But anyway, so I asked the commissioner this in his first press conference, and I could ask it. I said, Commissioner, do you consider yourself Irish? Okay, because we know, I know the North, you know the North. People are entitled to say they have a British identity or an Irish identity. And he's very strong. He said, I am Irish. So that's no problem. Northerners like me are Irish. No problem, right? But I'm talking about what message does it send if the government appoints another to that triumvirate who has not been a guard, walking on O'Connell Street, has been a mule, has been a skipper, has been a cake, all the way up, and Garda Síochána is ingrained in him and her or her. Personally, I could see the criticism that this sends a very wrong message that, right, okay,
absolutely,
we're going to have outsiders coming in. And I just think the government are in the horns of a dilemma here, because I don't think this pension pot issue is going to be sorted. And I think it's more than likely that it is going to be someone who did not prosper in Garda Síochána coming in.
Mm-hmm. I don't envy it'll be the next government that has to deal with this, because it's going to come up right after the election. So it's going to be a difficult time at having to reorganize the top structure of Garda Síochána. I don't envy the next Justice Minister, if it is still Helen McEntee or not.
But also there's another issue, right? So say all those, as is likely, because they wrote this letter, asking for it to be laid. So if none of those 6 Garda assistant commissioners, we'll call them that, right? If none of them go for it, right? What level of ambition can supers or chiefs have? Because there's a pipeline. That assistant, one of the Garda assistant commissioners gets the deputy gig. There's a position that has to be filled, okay? So it's the shuffle, right? So if you're a super or a chief and you're going, okay, what is my roadmap for moving on within Garda Síochána? That's a problem as well. So are we going to see a brain drain of supers, chiefs, and even ACs going, well, look, there's no way I'm going to progress here because of this pension thing, so I'm off? That's a real problem in my mind, because you have to have a wash through to reinvigorate the guards. And if all these people have certain ranks, well, there's none for me. That's a problem.
Really interesting. Potential crisis coming down the road there.
And this is why you and I are hurlers on the ditch, and we don't have to worry about this. We can just point it out. We don't have to solve the problems. Thank God. Speaking of another problem, and it's something we should keep an eye on, Blanchardstown.
Yeah. Well, I'll tee you up for this, I suppose. The latest development in the ongoing feud that kicked off. Well, it's been ongoing, but the biggest event is the murder of Tristan Sherry and of Jason Hennessy Sr. on Christmas Eve. But yeah, just while you were off, there was a very serious incident involving Devin Hennessy, who was targeted by a well-known criminal in the West Dublin area, Blanchardstown area, and he was shot at in his bulletproof BMW. And I'd say he's very thankful that he was in his bulletproof BMW, because he was not shot, he was not injured, and he escaped with that, with his life. But that was very much another attempt in this ongoing feud. And now you have information that this is going to really boil up.
Yeah, and Devin Hennessy is the son of the late Jason Hennessy, who was the murder victim. Okay, so just to explain that to our listeners, there are various hotspots that become hot once in a while. Years ago, it was Limerick. We also, we remember, obviously, during the Kin and Hutch feud, Crumlin and North Inner City, Dublin. were two real hotspots, particularly North Inner City, where a lot of the murders happened. My information is Gardaí are very worried about Blanchardstown. Finglas is another part of what's called the K District.
Yeah.
That has calmed down a good bit for various reasons, including the heavy policing activity and against certain gangsters in that area. They're very worried about Blanchardstown, and I fear in the coming months things will get bad. It's just all the radar tells them that that's going to be a very, very big issue in the not even the coming weeks, or not even the coming months, but the coming weeks and possibly the coming days. So it's just one to keep an eye on. I fear that there will be more incidents in Blanchardstown.
And there've already been multiple, I suppose, foiled incidents. Certainly we had a story I can recall a couple of weeks back about associates of the late Jason Hennessy possibly having weapons or trying to procure weapons. So there is ongoing concerns about feud violence. And like all feuds, like the Kinahan-Hutch feud, the worst ones are deeply, deeply personal. And, you know, there are two people here who were murdered on Christmas Eve, and there are people who love them and who were closely connected to them and who are out for revenge on both sides.
So you know, as you say, Paul, feuds are intensely personal things. So, and sometimes it's very, very difficult for people to try and resolve it, people on the outside to try and resolve it, because it is such a personal thing. So I just wanted to raise that. I think we're taking the temperature, and I was taking the temperature when I was away and just back, and somebody who I trust did say, look, just be prepared for Blanchardstown. Yeah. All right.
Well, on that shiny note, we'll see how much of the future you predicted there next week.
Can I just do one more thing? Can I dedicate this to the memory of the late Nell McCaffrey? Nell, you probably didn't know her, Paul, because she was out of the game.
I knew of her.
Yeah, everybody knew of her. I first met her probably 1997, 98, when we were at Drumcree on the Garvahi Road and all that sort of stuff. And Nell McCaffrey was just a giant, and I was just a wee neophyte starting off. But she was always I found she was always very, very kind to younger journalists. She probably didn't have to pass any attention to me, but I always found her very helpful. And she'd always speak to me, always called me George. Don't know why. I let her at it. I was too afraid to go, but I always got this sense, a real sharp journalist. And do you know what? One of these people, when she'd be looking at you, she'd be examining you, going, is this fella a buckethead, or is there a hint of intelligence and a bit of talent to it? She's always sort of going, what's your story? So she was very, very, I think she never stopped scanning and concentrating. And I read a couple of her pieces that people put up on Twitter or X on Wednesday when her death was announced. And it was about, say, the Magdalen Laundries and the Maggies. Some of it was just fantastic writing. And she was a force of nature, but I would urge people to go and have a look at whatever writing of hers they can find, because she was a really, really excellent writer. And she was a fantastic journalist. And I think a lot of people will be mourning her.
Well, it's a lovely note. May she rest in peace.
Sleep well, Nell.
Right. On that note, thank you for listening to us, and we'll be back to you next week. And as I said, keep the questions coming. We'll definitely do another Q&A soon.
Defo. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.